So much. And that's a nice segue, because today's special guest is the man who invents them all. Yes, it is none other than Dave Browne from Browne Amplification. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome to Guildford and the UK generally. Thanks for bringing such terrible weather with you.
You're welcome.
Why are you here? That's it. Don't go too deep with the answer to that. I'm just talking about your trip to Andertons.
To show you these pedals.
You've been to the UK much before?
A couple of times. Not enough.
Not enough.
I love it over here.
You're staying, David is staying in the very picturesque village of Shear, just on the outskirts of Guildford. What was the famous movie that was there with Jude Law? Something wasn't it, recently?
Was it The Terrible Holiday?
The Holiday
Went Wrong? Oh, I'm thinking of the murder mystery that was a mockery of that movie.
Oh, maybe. I haven't seen it, but yes, there were a few years ago when the whole of Shear was taken over by a film crew for a couple of weeks. Anyway, I digress. We are going to run through the pedals that Browne Amplification make and some of the thinking behind that. We've got a wonderful board here with some other pedals on it as well, which are just to embellish the whole sound. But tell us, Dave, I don't know a great deal about you. We talked a little bit before the camera. Started filming. You grew up as a classical guitar player, right? Rather than necessarily a sort of a electric guitar. Tell us a bit about that, and you know, why then the move into pedals that are for, you know, playing electric guitar.
Well, there was pretty strict rules in my house growing up about what kind of music we were allowed to listen to, and what kind of music we were allowed to play. And from the moment I heard drums, I wanted to play drums. And it was, drums are too loud, you can't play drums. And then I wanted to play the bass, and no, you can't play the bass. So I wanted to play guitar, and my dad said, well, if you want to play guitar, here's this. He handed me a nylon string and said, you can play this guitar. So I played that guitar for years. And eventually a friend of mine got an electric guitar, and I'd bike over to his house and we'd play electric guitar for hours. And but at home it was classical guitar only. And eventually, when I went to college, I majored in classical guitar. And I love classical guitar still to this day.
Do you have a favorite? Well, you must do, like, a favorite Spanish or classical guitar player. Who do you? I do often, or no. So I periodically take a dive into some of that stuff, and the technique of those players is, I mean, you know, they are Ingve-esque in how they can play their sort of stuff.
Yeah, so there's a couple Andres Segovia pieces that I'm still trying to work out. I mean, it just blows my mind.
But so classical guitar obviously was what you majored on, which is kind of cool. But at what sort of age did you get into the electric guitar then, and which bands were you know, kind of your early inspirations?
Well, you know, there was a lot of, like, this glam metal that was a big deal, you know, Poison and all that kind of stuff. I remember the first time I heard Guns N' Roses. I was telling Ben about this the other night. We were at the Midway at the fairgrounds, and these girls were listening to Mr. Brownstone and just going nuts, and I was just like, wow, I guess this is what I want to do with my life. But the first time I heard Hendrix, it was kind of I was confused what he was saying, but the guitar playing was it just made more sense to me than anything ever had. And I was like, there it is.
That's cool. Now, you didn't start the pedal thing until much more recently. I'm talking, we've been carrying the Protein for maybe 5 years, something like that.
It's been like 6 years.
Okay, 5 or 6 years. So what was the journey then prior to that? So, because you were obviously involved in electronics and stuff for several years before then, but tell us about the sort of the journey.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with my dad was a mechanical engineer, so it was build your own or fix your own of anything. And then eventually, after paying for an amp repair, decided to start learning to do that myself, and started fixing friends' amps. Eventually built an amp for a friend, and then started building amps 8 or 10 a year, not a lot. Started building. I fell at one point and broke this bone in my hand, and so I couldn't play guitar. So I decided to build a guitar.
Okay.
So I built a Telecaster, and then after that, built myself a Stratocaster, and started to realize that my favorite guitars, I could make them the way exactly that I wanted them. If I wanted the radius of a Gibson, but the shape of a Fender, and built guitars and amplifiers. But eventually, was trying to figure out a way to get off the road and stop touring, be home with the kids more, and decided to launch the Pro Team. So we made 100 of them.
Wow.
And hoped that we could sell enough to make our money back.
And as far as the engineering side behind this, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the artists that you were working with that kind of had this concept, if you like, of the Pro Team.
Yeah.
But how do you, was it just from your mechanical engineering background, or is it a lot more trial and error? But how do you start approaching interpreting the sound that an artist is going, I'm trying to achieve this, into a circuit design that sounds like that?
I think years of trying to voice amps for people, and even for myself, I had a band and I was playing a JTM 45, and I was trying to voice it so it would fit just right in the mix, because the other bandmate was playing a Vox that I had built him, an AC30 type, and was just playing around with potentiometers and caps and resistors and voicing things. So when Adam Snigowski brought me these two pedals and said, I would like these two in one, and I would like this one to work better in this way and this one to work better in this way, it was trial and error, but also I'd been doing that for years. So it was just changing all the EQ circuits in the active tone control on the green side to where the low end was right and the mid range was right, and lowering the gain, and just all the things that we did to make it super user friendly, I think.
I'm kind of intrigued as to why the pedal market, seemingly sort of every pedal maker tends to just sort of have their twist on 3 or 4 fairly classic drive circuits. Is that just because the nature of the drive circuit is that there aren't any more variants of that? In other words, because people talk about taking a tube screamer or a blues breaker or blah 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 blah, different circuits, and they go, but mine has a slightly different bass end, mid-range, headroom, whatever the characteristics might be. So they're all unique in their own flavour. Is there almost like, is it just impossible to just invent a new drive circuit because there aren't any more? Or is it that we're all so comfortable and familiar with the circuits that we know that it's people just want old circuits tweaked?
I think it's probably two things. I think one, when I started working on pedals, I was modifying tube screamers to try to get them, less mid-range, more bass, more gain, figuring out how to get what you wanted out of something that you already had, and the components are pretty easy to swap. But I think it's a lot like tubes. Like the guys that designed the tubes drew up schematics for how to use the tubes, the same as the guys that made the op amps said, this is an op amp, here's how you use it, and they would draw out a drawing of a circuit of how to use it, and then brilliant engineers would go in and say, okay, this is how we're going to incorporate this into a guitar amplifier device. So there's an unlimited amount of variables that you can change in that, but the op amp works the way the op amp works, or the transistor works the way the transistor works. So you can reinvent the wheel, but you're kind of still starting from the same drawing board.
The components that are sort of fixed, if you like, and therefore determine the boundaries within which the...
You can run it at whatever voltage you want. You can bias it however you want. But if you want it to sound right, ideally you've got these fixed parameters.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I just always wondered that. Right. This is a super looking board here. I'm reasonably familiar with most of the stuff. I'm probably least familiar with the board itself. Who are these guys?
Temple Audio out of Canada. They're a great company. I really like these guys. I did buy this, but they're fantastic, and we've worked with them on a couple of different things, and they're just fantastic individuals. And I really enjoyed putting this together. This modular system they built is it's probably my favorite board I've ever.
Yeah, I guess the main thing about this board is that when you move away from using Velcro, right? They've got their own sort of proprietary fixing underneath. It's pretty cool. So we've got a mono input. We're going through the pedals. The final one is a stereo reverb pedal. but it has like a patch bay on the board here. So this pink cable here is my input, and the two yellow ones are stereo output. If we just turn everything off, I'll just give people an idea of, basically, this is my, oh, got no tone control, hang on. So it's very clean, dry, off we go. But I can't play with no reverb for any length of time, so. Well, which one are we going with?
Is that good, or do you want number one?
I like it. No, it's fine. Absolutely, it's cool. So talk me through some. As I said, I'm pretty familiar with the drive pedals, especially Protein, Carbon, Atom, and Gritador. I've seen this in the catalogue, but if to be honest with you, I've never really understood what it is. So what is the Fixer?
So the Fixer is my answer to lots of friends and players saying, "What's your favorite buffer?" And I would always say, I don't want to lose low end, and I don't want the feel of the guitar to change. I want it to feel like I'm plugged into an amp. So this is my favorite buffer. And then I put two boosts after it, and the idea was, if I switch from a Les Paul to a Gretsch, or an old Telly to a 335, the signal is so much different that I wanted to be able to give it a little bit of boost. And also, I like the way these boosts clip, so you can use it as a bit of a drive, or you can just use it as a bit of a level boost. So I'll run one of them, at 1 o'clock, and the other one at 3 o'clock, and when you hit A, B, it'll get significantly louder.
So, okay.
And then, I also don't like to have my tuner in my chain, because I don't feel like tuners, they're not meant to sound like anything, right? But the less pedals in your chain, the better. Well, or the more pedals. But anyway, it's got a tuner out, so the input is buffered and split. So tuner out is always on, but you can mute and tune.
That's interesting. I mean, the buffer rabbit hole is one that I think it would be fair to say that if you're putting a pedal board together, don't worry too much about buffers right at the start. I mean, this is very much, I think, once you've become very familiar with your setup and the guitars you're using and the cables you're using and the amps and the board itself. But loosely, I mean, I could try my best to describe what a buffer's doing, but I would rather, you're the expert, I would rather you're doing it. But what is, in essence, a buffer doing, and how do you have different degrees of what a good buffer is? Isn't a buffer just a buffer?
To an extent, but they're all going to have an effect on the sound, and I want the buffer to have a pleasant effect on the sound. And for me, this buffer, when I turn it off, I miss it and I want it back on. So that's why this is my favorite buffer. What it's doing is changing the impedance of the guitar signal, because your pickups are meant to plug into the front of a 12AX7 or into another amplifier, and they work great. But if you plug them into 50 feet of cable, all of a sudden you get all this high-end loss, because this little tiny output is not meant to drive that signal that far. So we're changing the impedance and making it much simpler. I love the hose analogy. You're taking a large hose with low pressure and you're making it a very small hose, so all of a sudden the pressure goes way up and you don't lose signal.
Okay, that's cool. Well, yeah, I mean, and it's true to say, obviously, this is that, I remember sort of going through that period where guitar magazines and experts would talk about true bypass. And there was a time when I think everyone was like, "Oh no, a pedal is only good if it's true bypass." A bit like, I remember amplifiers as well. People say, an amp's only good if it's class A.
Right.
And I think it's one of the things YouTube and the internet has done generally is massively educate guitar players to understand that actually, there's a reason when you might want true bypass, and there's a reason you do want buffers, and the same with Class A and AB and all that kind of jargon. So yeah, generally speaking, I think, if you've got, if you're using your 20-foot cables and you've got a few pedals, 100% you'll notice if you use a good buffer, it will bring back some of that lost high frequency. But it does get slightly confusing, because there are vintage sort of fuzz pedals that will go, "Oh no, hang on a second, I don't sound better if you buffer the input going into me. Could you just briefly touch on, you know, that side of things? And again, is that something that a good buffer can remedy, or is it very much about no, you need to just turn the buffer off if you're going to use those kinds of pedals?
Yeah, there's certain pedals that want to see your pickup as the source. So changing the impedance has a negative effect on them. If you have a old germanium fuzz, any of the old tone benders, fuzz faces, things like that, they need to go before your buffer. They need to not see the buffer. Buffer comes after that.
So it's not a question of turning the buffer off, it's about placement in the chain.
Right.
It's like fuzz first, then buffers.
Well, this buffer, you can't turn it off. Yeah. So we thought about putting an on-off switch on it, but my thought was I want the least controls on it possible. And it sounds better when it's on, so why make a switch to turn it off?
I think that dual, I'd always, you know, if I'm switching between a Les Paul and a Strat, for example, I think I'm doing so almost in the knowledge that I want the Les Paul to be the pokier one, and I want the Strat. Yes. So I've not really thought about this idea of being able to switch between two different output levels. But I think that's quite a clever idea. If you want the tonality of a humbucker, but without necessarily feeling like it's going to bump your levels up a little bit, it's quite a cool idea to have those two. And I certainly would agree with you. It's sometimes you get a really nice clean tone on your amplifier with a single coil, and then you go over to the humbucker and it immediately starts to overdrive the amplifier. The idea of being able to go, well, I'm just going to compensate for that by just dropping it down.
You can back it down too. Yeah. That's nice. I was touring with a guitar player who had a really awesome SG Junior, like a 60s SG Junior, and the guitar was awesome and it sounded amazing. But he would never play it live during the show because it required him to get the monitor engineer to change his levels. And so that's part of why, for guys that are playing live, it's just meant to solve some problems. That's why it's the fixer.
Cool. Well, so that's the first thing we're plugged into. Then I assume we're going through all the drive pedals. Like you say, the tuner is coming out of a separate output from the fixer here. Most of these, all but one of these drive pedals are yours. There is Zach from Mythos has made it onto the board. I don't know why, but we'll find out shortly. But let's start with the Protein, which was the first pedal that you did. And I mean, arguably presumably your best-selling pedal today.
For sure.
I'm sure it's our best-selling Browne amplification pedal. So, okay, talk about the time you spent with Adam, and for people who don't know, you know, what kind of stuff is he playing, and what did he bring to you, and what was he trying to get you to solve?
Yeah, Adam Snigowski is a good friend and a great guitar player, and I built him several amps and several guitars, and he came to me and said, I really need a pedal that I can show up and have bad backline and still get a good sound. Because he'd say, you know, this is what's on the rider, but then I, you know, especially be traveling overseas, you know, to areas where there wasn't even access to the kind of quality of amps where we could get here or get in the States. And, you know, he would have a deluxe on the rider, and he would show up and have some tiny little. He told me one time he had a purple amp that had an 8-inch speaker, and he'd never even heard of the name of it before. So it was something that he could get a good sound out of almost anything, or even plug it in direct if he had to. So that was the idea behind the Protein, is make anything sound good.
Wow. So tell me, you've got a blue pedal and a green pedal. Iconic colors of the pedals that it's based on.
Yeah.
And we talked about that ODR1 thing. And again, I'm convinced, and people will be able to look this up on the internet, but I'm convinced when I started at Andertons way back 35 odd years ago, the ODR1 existed. It was a pedal. And I'm sure we used to sell one or two of them, but it's only really been in the last 5 or 10 years when, you know, guitar players have started to go to designers like you and saying, I bloody love this pedal, but could you just tweak something out of it? Probably mainly the bass end, I don't know. Why do you think it became such a, you know, people call it the Nashville pedal, don't they? You know, why did it become such an iconic drive pedal?
Well, we were talking earlier about the Tube Screamer and where a stock Tube Screamer really shines, right? Well, the guys that were using the ODR1s were doing things to solve some of the inherent things that they didn't prefer about the ODR1, and that is a lot of bass. It has, I mean, you're running the gain barely cracked because it has so much gain, and then you're pushing the mids up a little bit to kind of make it more like a tube screamer. And when you do that, you end up with this really magical pedal. And so Adam had seen several guys, one in particular, Uncle Larry in Nashville, who would use an ODR1 with an EQ pedal afterwards, and it just sounded really, really magical. And so we just got into the ODR1 circuit and just started modifying it, taking away some gain and changing all the frequencies in the tone control and just getting it to where it sounded the way that we wanted without having to...
Let's have a little listen to it. So it's the green side of this. If you want, you can buy just the green side of the protein in this pedal, right? So is there any difference between these two circuits here, or if you're hearing this, are you basically hearing this?
Basically exactly the same.
Okay. So, I mean, I love this sound. Always surprised me to hear it called the Nashville pedal, because it's pretty gainy, right? And you don't sort of associate necessarily Nashville with Motley Crue or anything like that. But you're right. That original ODR1, I remember the EQ control on it being called Spectrum, which I'd never heard anybody use that terminology before. And there was a point relatively early on, maybe halfway or whatever, that it was like, man, it's so much bass on this thing, it's unusable, or you just don't need it.
Right.
And I don't remember it. I remember it having a lot of drive on it, but I don't necessarily remember it having excessive amounts. It was always in my mind a higher gain pedal. But tell us about what did Adam want you to do to that? And so was it just less bass end and less gain?
Well, we cut the gain down to about a quarter of what is the original amount of gain. And it's got an active tone control, and so there's 3 different sets of frequencies being controlled, and we modified all of them. So brought up mid-range, cut out bass. And funny enough, Adam's secret setting, which is what he'll use if he has a...
Not so secret anymore. Come on, tell us.
very bad sounding amp, or if he's plugging it direct, he'll turn the gain almost all the way down. The level, most of the way up to get to unity, and then the tone kind of wherever you need it. And
let's see what that kind of... It's a very dynamic pedal, Let's just turn that. It doesn't feel like it's too muffled like the... I've always loved a guitar sound where as you're holding the sustain there, it feels like there's a slight feedback overtone going into it, even at relatively low volumes, Just throw in some jazz notes for you there, just, because... So a little bit more drive. Actually, where does it go really bright up here or not? Probably too bright for this guitar, but I can see it. If you had a darker guitar, that's where you'd want that. Such a good rock tone though, isn't it? But it's still got clarity, and even with the drive fairly up, You really can, just with your plectrum, go from edge of breakup through to full bore throaty gain stuff. But that's only half the story, right?
Right.
Over on the other side was the suitably coloured blue blues breaker, another circuit that I feel went unsung for many years, you know, before, again, other brands started going, well, there is this blues breaker circuit, which is kind of cool. The old original Marshall blues breaker, when they reissued it last year, I'd forgotten how little it really does until the pedal is almost all the way up.
Yeah.
And then it kind of happens. And I suppose there's the opportunity as a designer is to go, well, how can we kind of make that a slightly more linear? So what did you do on the blues breaker side?
So we added a whole nother output section.
Right.
And a really powerful one so that it's barely cracked open.
Right.
Which gives it tons of headroom. So the compression that it has is very different than the compression that the green side has. You know, the green side has a little bit of squish and sag, like, you know, which feels really great for playing lead stuff. But this is really bold and lots of output and lots of headroom. So because of that, you can smack it with the green side cranked up and it doesn't fall apart.
Yeah. And
so for me, it's not 2 sounds, it's 3. And that's what I love about it.
Let's just hear the... So there's a lot more clean notes coming through on the blues breaker side, aren't there? It's not, everything's not overdriven. Great rock and roll sound. And as you can see, we've got the gain halfway up already. So you're saying that, again, there's just a bucket load of sort of boost headroom as well here. Do you know what I love about all your pedals? I think you're a bass fan. You know, none of your pedals remove bass in an unpleasant way. I feel every time I play one of them, they're just fat sounding drive pedals. It's enormous, that sound. And then lots of gain, or not lots of gain, but you know. It's a very different, if we go back to here, you know. You're right, it's squishy, fun, compressed, overdriven, all the good things, whereas this stays open, more clarity. And so what you're basically saying is, which way, I mean, typically, which way around does Adam use it? Is there a sense of a rhythm and lead, or is it just 3 different types of gain?
Well, you know, this is your sparkly, jangly, you know, all those rhythm kind of things that you want to do. If you need a good rock rhythm, this is, the green side just does such a great rock rhythm. And then the way that he and I both tend to run it, kind of like you have it here, I tend to run the gain up a little more here on this one and run this one down a little bit more. And so then I've got this, and they're both equally great on their own, but when you turn them on together, that's your lead sound.
Well, let's do that. So. You can so hear that feedback thing that I like so much about a drive pedal.
It's ready to go.
Man, I don't even know what I keep thinking this is a quarter pounder, and then I look at it and it's not. I think it's just like I think it's called a vintage hot or something, Seymour Duncan. But there's something about single coil pickups with overdrive that kind of just have a open.
Yeah.
It just sounds. So yeah, I think that would be, like you say, rock rhythm, lead solo. I realise also that we've also knocked off another pedal in this, because of course the blue side is the carbon.
Yes.
So that's essentially, you've got the choice here as a customer to if you don't want a dual pedal and you're thinking, well, the only side of that I really want or can afford or like or whatever is the green side or the blue side, you've got the option here. I do notice though, again, you have got a switch on the individual carbon, which isn't, at least externally, on the Protein. Is that the same switch that you were talking about?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So I think that was that while we were recording or before?
Before.
I forget, it was before, wasn't it? So there's a 3-stage kind of top end brightness switch. Mm-hmm. And is that internal in here or not available at all?
I don't feel like the Protein needs it, but when we did the Carbon X, David Ryan Harris and I talked, and he said he wanted 2 carbons in a box. He asked me, can you do that, years ago? He's a lovely dude.
Yeah.
And I said, I'd love to do that. It seemed excessively bright to me. So that got me going, well, not only do I want this side to be different than this side, but I also want to be able to take some top end off. And also, I love the carbon on bass, and being able to take some top end off is nice. Or depending on what you're stacking it with. If you're stacking with the green side of the Protein, I don't feel like it needs it.
Right.
If you're stacking it with other things, you might. If you're going to put a Rat in front of it, you might want that high cut switch.
Yeah.
And so it's middle is off, and then you have 2 varying level. It's very subtle, very, very high frequencies that it's cutting, but.
And you said that, so this isn't just a mirror image of 2 carbons either, is it? So
this is much more like a stock blues breaker, but more gain, different clipping. It's really greasy, and I don't know what all the words are.
So would you say that this side of the carbon is more like the carbon that's in the Protein?
Yes.
Or, yeah.
This and this are almost identical. There's just a little high cut switch.
So it's a dialed back carbon rather than a
but gained up
one. Dialed back and gained up.
Yeah, way less output. So it doesn't have the same output as this one does, but it has more gain.
Well, so which side should we start on then? This side, or does it not really matter?
Let's try it.
That feels, I see what you're saying now, because there's quite a bit of gain, but it does feel dialed back somehow.
More like an original blues breaker.
Right. I feel like now would be a good time to swap guitars, and you have to play as well at some point here, Dave. Maybe I'll leave you to do the Gritador or something, or the fuzz pedals. Let's try this. That would be an opportune time to demonstrate the tuner output on your fixer.
This side of the Carbon X2 is definitely tuned to do that thing that you're talking about, where it just wants to sustain into feedback. The way the clipping is designed. I'm a big fan of that type of clipping.
I'm kind of interested as well to play around with this, what we went back to the fix, because you can immediately hear I've got more poke from this guitar. So what we're saying is I could, if I wanted to, just dive on over to the red side and just dial it back a little bit, can't I? And it's small degrees, right? But it's just what you want when you get into having lots of pedals and guitars. And
if you got in-ears in, it makes a huge difference if one guitar is even 1 dB louder.
Right. It's a very British rock guitar tone, isn't it? That as opposed to the Atom side of the protein. So. So
this also does have that high cutting gauge.
Yeah, it's hopefully people are hearing it. I'm hearing not dissimilar amounts of gain. I'm hearing more bottom end, I think, on this side. Yeah, just like this side sounds slightly tighter, slightly less bass end, but I still think they're quite similar sounding.
Very similar.
So where would I'm interested, David Ryan Harris as well. I never really had him down as a big Overdrive guy, but what's his, trying to think now, what most of the time you're seeing David, he's singing, isn't he? And there's maybe someone else playing the guitar or whatever.
Right.
But what's his, was this for like a solo project thing he was doing, or?
Well, when he and I talked, he was on tour with John Mayer and playing guitar for him. So, what he's doing for his solo thing is definitely different than what he's doing when he's playing with John. But he definitely plays some rock guitar and is a great guitar player. But less of what the green side of the protein would be than what this would be.
So I guess if you're not like an out-and-out rock kind of player, you might be more, you'll probably get more tones out of the two of these.
Yeah, it's just a really different rock sound for sure.
They're very complementary of each other. They stack. Little bit of fuzziness coming in there as well. So would you typically think that you might set one side up with more extremities, or I suppose it's just personal taste, isn't it?
More like what you just did there.
Yeah. Oh, my Les Paul is being decidedly Les Paulish today. You can really hear the difference in the bass end and the amount of gain coming from the green side versus the extra blue side. So yeah, again, cool sounding pedal and a different tool for a different situation,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
We'll talk about the Gritador and then the T4 last. The Gritador, we had a fun conversation, didn't we, about the Tube Screamer prior to filming, and obviously part of the appeal, or part of the character of a Tube Screamer is to a big mid hump, additional gain if you dial it in, obviously some boost if you dial it in, and a bass cut is its natural kind of thing. Which I think, if you go back to some of those early, big Marshall stack, tons of volume, sense of maybe a sound flubbing out a bit, the bass cut was a great solution for that rig. And of course, Tube Screamer probably is the iconic. I'm sure if you said to 100 people in the street, name me overdrive pedal. You know, it's like the Tube Screamer would be the one that you know people would say.
For sure.
But it doesn't feel to me like that many modern amplifiers, especially as guitar players have tried to shrink their rigs down. It doesn't necessarily feel to me like a bass cut is that appropriate anymore. So
Right.
what's your view on that?
I always like to think about, you know, the twin reverb with the mid dip and tons of low, and, you know, then you plug a Tube Screamer in there and it brings those mids back and cuts some of the low out, and it goes from great clean to a great lead sound. But for me, I was playing through, I mean, the amps I tend to prefer are more like this one that we're playing, and that's the kind of stuff I was building: big, loud, clean amps with, you know, Fender-ish, but maybe a little more flat of EQ. And so my favorite Tube Screamer that I would work on would, you know, bring the level down a little bit, bring the bass back a little bit, change the gain up a little bit. Again, I really like asymmetrical clipping, so that's where I tend to go with it, and not quite the mid spike that a stock Tube Screamer would have.
Well, just because you know, people have heard me for too long now, so let's plug you in, and we'll give an idea of. I'm going to go back to that initial side because we're back to using some slightly lower output pick. It's a great sounding guitar. This one we just took it out of our guitar gallery. So this is a master-built Jazz Master. But anyway, you can find out more about that if you dive over to our website. So now again, Tube Screamers kind of generally have two go-to settings, don't they? So you've got the guitar player that takes all the drive out, uses it a boost thing, and then sets sort of tone to taste. Or you've got the guitar player that uses it more as a conventional sort of drive pedal. So I guess going into a completely clean amplifier, we're going to use it more on the drivier setting. But you play and we'll... It's you kind of hear its heritage in that it does do that mid hump in a kind of familiar way, and the drive is familiar, but it's much fatter and it hasn't got that real nasal quality that a Tube Screamer has. So if we dial in maybe a little bit more of the gain. It sounds fantastic. I kind of feel, of all the pedals that you've done, the Gritador is the one that I feel is least likely to appeal to someone that wants a Tube Screamer because of what a Tube Screamer is famous for doing. Right. And it's absolutely designed to someone that kind of almost likes the vibe of a Tube Screamer but doesn't like the things that it's famous for doing. So it's a really cool take on the Tube Screamer because it most of the other clones that I know of a Tube Screamer stick to that formula, you know, of take the bass end out and all that kind of stuff. So we like the Gritador. I'm intrigued as to why the Gritador hasn't made it into a double pedal yet, because it seems to be a sort of a relatively accepted thing that you can stack a Tube Screamer with another drive circuit and get good results.
I mean, I love it stacked with the Carbon, or, I mean, you know, these two together. Adam and I went back and forth a lot. I wanted this to be the green side of the protein. He wanted what we ended up with. And the reason was this plays really well with a big, loud, clean amp. If you have an amp that is lacking low end, or, you know, it's not as much of a problem solver. It's more just a really good drive pedal. It's my favorite drive pedal, but it's my favorite drive pedal with a really good amp. If I had, and this is no slag on Princeton reverbs. I love Princeton reverbs. But if I was playing through a Princeton reverb, I would pick this.
Right.
Because of the lack of low end.
Yeah.
And,
Cool.
this isn't going to get me a rock rhythm sound through a Princeton reverb as much.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to hear. Can I hear, like, so what's the order that we've got? Is this one coming first, this one coming second?
The Carbon is first after
Okay.
the Fixer, and then it's going into the Argo, and then it's going into the Protein.
But if I stack these two, it's
it's
Carbon
backwards.
first.
So if we what we should do is these two, this side and this.
Oh, I
then
see. Yeah. So I think you're right. It always makes sense to choose Screamer first, doesn't it? So
I mean, that's how I prefer them because of
Yeah.
the headroom of the Carbon.
All right. Well, look, let's just hear what that sounds like. So. I was going to say, keep playing, just so I can... Oh man, I mean, I'm not just saying this because you're sitting in the room, but the fatness of the sound that you get, they're huge pedals, and the dynamic range in them is just, you really can pick up every nuance of what's happening with the pick. But I mean, look, I think you should do that. I think that should be the next dual pedal. The Carbon on one side,
Lee said it.
Gritador on the other. I think that would be cool. I'm just into these 2-button.
Yeah.
I think it's just a great solution. It's less space on the pedalboard. Usually, it's cheaper to buy a single dual than it is to buy 2 separate singles. And often I think if you're, as a guitar player, if you're not sure what a good combination would be, then you kind of know if you buy a good brand of pedal and it's a dual pedal that the designer has gone, no, these two complement each other well. So we've covered everything now except the T4. And we might as well talk about the Argo as well. I mean, if for no other reason than we like Zach and it's a bit of publicity for his pedals. But, why do a fuzz when, what was the allure to that kind of sound?
It's the same thing with the Tube Screamer. Why do we need another Tube Screamer? We absolutely don't. But I worked on a single Big Muff for years. I had my favorite Big Muff, and I loved it. It was a ram's head. It was everything until you tried to play it with a band, and then your sound went away.
Right.
The minute you turned it on. So my goal was to, how do I make the Big Muff usable with the band? And love David Gilmour and guys like that who have done great things with Big Muffs. And so I was playing it one time, and Josh Scott came up to me and said, "What was that?" And I said, "Oh, it was this." And he said, "What is it?" And I said, "It's just my modified Big Muff." And he said, "You need to release that next." And this was after the Protein.
Right.
And I said, "The world doesn't need another Big Muff." And he said, "They need that." So I listened to him, and we did it. And something that I loved afterwards, as I was going through some of the development phase, I found 20 or 30 hand-drawn schematics of Big Muffs that I'd done over the years as I tried to find my perfect, So that's what this is. It's, kind of makes your guitar sound like an electric kazoo.
I was going to say, because I'm probably, of all the different kinds of drive sounds there are, I'm probably the least fond of the sort of wall of sound type Big Muff vibe. It works great in certain scenarios. The sort of Doom scenario and stuff sounds killer, but it's not really what I've played. And when I hear people refer to guitarists like David Gilmour playing fuzz like that, I can't immediately correlate that with like a fuzzy tone. I mean, I certainly can if you perhaps go back sort of Cream era and stuff like that. And Hendrix, obviously you can. But what was it about the Big Muff that you found hard to work in a band context?
All the mid-range was gone.
So it's just too scooped, is it?
Yeah.
Too much bass, too much treble, tons and tons of overdrive and no mid-range.
Right.
And that's so, well, let's have a little listen then. And we got good guitar to kind of do that with. Oh, he's turning on some delay from
we
the
did
Meris.
say Gilmore.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the Telly just because it's here. This beautiful guitar.
Let me hold that for a second.
All right.
There you go. This is another guitar that you can find in our gallery. This is cool, right? P90 at the neck.
Yeah.
Bigsby, or Fender's version of a Bigsby, a Fender branded Bigsby.
I love this bridge that these guys have.
Yeah, is that a Levi Perry thing where he's sort of, I think he cuts his own brass saddles for those bridges, which is pretty cool.
I don't know, but it's brilliant.
Let's go! You're not wrong about the it's got a much more pronounced vocal quality to the mid-range. It's singing, isn't it, really, that pedal, isn't it? Without excessive sort of bass end. Going back to the buffer conversation we had at the beginning, is this a pedal that doesn't care whether you have a buffer in front of it?
Buffer friendly.
So it's not old-fashioned germanium kind of temperamental. No. And you mentioned the Gilmore. For the sort of Gilmore fans, is that a much lower gain setting, or is that sort of around about where it was?
I mean, that gain's pretty high up. I might use it a little lower than that. If you go really low on the gain on this, it kind of gets a little bit woolly. Kind of gets a little more fuzz face-ish.
Yeah.
But, you know, for the Gilmore thing, I love that about it.
I would almost describe that as a gateway fuzz. I think if you're a player that's maybe slightly afraid of some of those slightly more chaotic fuzzes, this feels a little bit more predictable. Might be the wrong word, but controlled. Does sound good though. I mean, there are some settings where it doesn't necessarily sound, you know. There's that little bit of chaos just behind it. Chords is probably where it's more apparent that it's a different circuit, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think just because of what I grew up listening and stuff that I like to play, I like the tightness and the control of a traditional overdrive circuit, where, you know, and fuzz always scares me slightly that it's, you know, it's like, what's this gonna do?
For sure.
Well, look, it's been a joy to sort of go through your stuff, and hopefully people who've watched have got a better idea of if they want to get into the sort of the Browne amplification pedals, which ones that might suit them best. But I'm just, because let's just talk about the three pedals that aren't yours that are on here.
Absolutely.
So I mean, and is this board just a demo board for you, or is this actually a sort of a I'm going to go and do some gigs board with it?
Well, it's going to be the I'm going to go do some gigs with it board, but I did specifically put this together for this because I wanted to be able to showcase everything that we currently offer. But I also had to throw the Argo on because I love fuzz and I love octave fuzz, and that's a great one.
Are you trying to are you just trying to immerse yourself in this kind of thing so that when you do the next Browne amplification project of a sort of an octave fuzz, you'll have had some time?
I don't think I'll do an octave fuzz.
Really? It's got like amazing violin kind of quality, hasn't it? So I think you have to, as a guitar player, to go, what am I doing? Someone's put an octave fuzz on and I instantly play some terrible cliche Hendrix riff. It's like there must be something else I could play. So on the Argo then, you've got a boost, a fuzz and a blend. So what is it? Is the blend is between the fuzz and the octave sound or something, is it?
Between the no octave and octave. How much octave you're going to bring in, I think. I did turn this on as well.
Oh, cool.
I love stacking.
You can hear something changing here, can't you? Yeah, and now you've got that overtone. Just go mad. I'm into it and equally going slightly frightened of it as well. So
I love it for chords. I love that it will make chords sound way more interesting. Depending on how intensely you set it, it can ruin it. But
I mean, 1,000,000%. They've got two more pedals to quickly talk about, but this is, without necessarily identical pedals on it, this is how I would put a board together. I just have tons and tons of overdrive pedals and then reverb and delay at the very end.
Flavors.
Yeah, they are, because that's what they are. Yeah. I mean, I'm only really half joking. I remember there's a British guitar player, Chris Buck, who you might be familiar with now. He's got pretty well known over the last few years. And the first time I ever met Chris, he had this big board, probably the size of this table. And it was just like all different flavors of overdrive pedal. Can't even remember what pedal he had on it that wasn't overdrive. Maybe he had a Leslie pedal on it or something like that. And it was like, why do you need all these? And he's like, well, this one sounds like this, and if I pair these two together, I think he was even doing triple, like if I do these three drive pedals together, it's a certain vibe of a sound. And I think what I liked about it as well was the combinations were almost infinite. Once you've got 5 or 6 pedals on there, you can go this one, that one, not that, And as a guitar player, you're always searching, aren't you, for that, like, what do I need here? Where is it? And it might be different from one night to the next. Anyway, look, you got my favorite reverb pedal.
It's so good.
So why, probably the least known of all the brands that are on here, which is the Australian brand called Poly Pedals. And this is the reverb that he did, which now only uses convolution, IRs, in other words, sort of samples, if you like, of real spaces rather than digital algorithms. What drew you to that, and what did you have before, and what's your reverb thing?
I love reverb. Any sort of spatial effect is incredible. I saw you guys demo this, and I immediately pre-ordered one because it just sounds incredible. And when I played it, it's amazing. I have a Meris reverb that is amazing, and I love like the Flint, anything that'll do that. But this is it's just stunning, and it's really unique. I mean, we have it, we have the mix on one, but it really is wild what it will do. I think
it suited me, this, because we did the demo, and you're right, there's 30 or 40 preset, or not presets, so different spaces that I don't know where Loki, the guy who owns Poly, whether he travelled around the world getting stuff or if he was just capturing them some other way. But they're hyper immersive. I was finding if you use it how you've got it here, so drive pedals first into the reverb, I was finding if you turn the mix up too much, there's an audible drop in the level that comes out. So and they're so over the top. I mean, he hasn't gone round to, you know, like a shed and done this, but he's gone to, like, you know, the world's biggest nuclear bunker or whatever, you know.
Right.
So they're all terribly over the top reverbs, really immersive. And so, you know, mixed down at 1 or 2 is where I found they're most usable. But certainly. Yeah, it's very, it really, for me, highlights actually just how far digital has got to go before it is actually as real and immersive as you know, a captured real space. If you want, I'm not talking about trying to emulate maybe plates and springs and stuff like that. I'm talking about if you just want it to emulate a big actual cathedral or something like that. It's an incredible pedal. Yes, I love those. And then here's a brand I know we stock, and I've probably, you know, the Meris pedals that I've played in the past, I've you know, blown my mind a bit in terms of, like, they're a bit too complicated for me, but I know guitar players love them. So what have you chosen here and why?
This is the Meris LVX. These guys are really, really brilliant, and this pedal is far deeper than what I need a delay to be, but it sounds fantastic. It has some great sounds in it. It's got a built-in looper that works really, really well, and I'm just really impressed with it. I have the Enzo, and it's one of the most inspiring pedals to play.
Is the Enzo the synthy one?
Yeah, you have to have a MIDI controller with it, or you're going to be twiddling knobs all day. But
yeah, I've kind of got. I think those types of pedals are the one. Our approach to demos, as you guys will all know, is to unbox a pedal, plug it into a guitar rig, and go, what does it sound like that? And I kind of feel we did a bit of a disservice to that, to Enzo, because it unless you really understand what it's trying to do and you play into that style, it's just not, it's not a great demo to just plug it in and see what it does.
And I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours with an Enzo, and I still don't understand what it does.
I feel slightly better now.
It's cool.
But yeah. So what have we got in terms of just... Oh, it's nice, like a modulated.
I think that's meant to be like the Electro-Harmonics, the big one.
Deluxe Memory.
Deluxe Memory.
Whoa, now we've got reverb on reverb on reverb. Nice stereo panned. With like a weird reversey. Yeah.
There was a couple in here. Oh wait, let's see. This one was fun. This is the slap.
Could do that all day long.
Right.
Oh, what's this? Oh, this is full reverse stuff, isn't it? So.
Sub-octave.
I mean, guitar players have got so much fun at their feet these days, haven't they? So look, man, it's been great meeting you. I said, huge fan of your pedals. You know, definitely think as drive pedals go, every guitar player should try and, you know, experience one of your pedals. Particularly, I think, you know, you do this dual pedal thing really brilliantly, and the idea of seeing a Gritador and what you might pair it up with and where you might go with it is exciting. But yes, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Talking about your stuff, playing a bit of guitar. Thank you guys for tuning in. Everything on this board I think will be available to buy from Andertons should you wish so. Maybe not the board itself, maybe I can remedy that later this year, but pretty much everything else is. So yeah, if you've liked the sound of something, you know where to find it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.